Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geotab's Wildcard Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Shay Green. I'm a Sales Enablement Manager here at Geotab. For today's session, we'll be hearing from Jeff Hill, CAFM Fleet Manager for Black & Veatch. And with that being said, we won't make you wait any longer, and I'll hand things over to Jeff to get us started.
Thank you, Shay. Well, to give everybody a little bit of information about me, I am the Fleet Manager for Black & Veatch. I head up our global fleet operations. I've been here for 7 years. Like Shay said, I'm a CAFM. I received that in 2015. And if you haven't done that, you guys should do that if you're a fleet manager. And then also I've been on our local chair, the Mid-America NAFA chapter chair. I was that for the last 2 years, and I'm pretty active in our local NAFA chapter. So I'm really happy to be here today and to talk to you guys. And I'm really happy that Geotab asked me to do this. It's just been a really strange year, as everybody I'm sure knows. And I just soak up all these things that I can take in from different people, just not be able to do our normal networking and, no NAFA meetings yet, no NAFA at all, and, any of those type of conferences. So I really look forward to doing this. So what I want to talk about today is we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do with policies. And a lot of this is going to relate to what we do with telematics and how an effective policy can really help you with your telematics program. And I'll go over some of the things that we did in our program 5 years ago to really make a difference. And we kind of did things a little backwards. So I'm hoping I can help some folks today do things a little better than what we did. And then you guys can ask your questions, of course, at the end. And I look forward to doing my best to answer that. So some of the key takeaways for today is, you need to develop a plan. And with what your wants and needs are, you need to get the right key stakeholders involved when you're developing your plans and going to make your policy. It's so important to have those folks. Prioritize and focus on your goals. That is super important, and those change. I don't think you can stick with those same goals all the time. I know ours moved around, and what we thought we could do and what we actually ended up with were different. So be ready to adapt. And then share your successes. It's so important that once you get to where you want to be, and then as you keep moving forward, to share all those successes with everybody, just like I get to do today. And I'm really happy to be able to do that. It's really important when you're going in and you're going to start planning to work on your policy and you're kind of getting everything together, is just kind of a really good idea of what you want. So as you're developing that plan, like I said, I think a lot of it's going to be fluid as you kind of figure out what works best for you and how you can relate that to your company. Because every company's different, and nothing you can use, the CAN systems don't always work, or all the CAN options you have don't work. So sometimes you have to develop those goals, work with the people that you're going to have on your team, and start developing that policy. And then it's important to know too, this is what we did not do at first. We didn't start with the policy to kind of develop our telematics plan. We kind of had telematics in place, and then we had to go backwards and develop our policy so we could start enforcing and driving driver behavioral changes. So one of the things I want to talk about for sure is that backbone. It's going to be so important that you get your team together, and we'll talk about your key stakeholders here in a minute. When you get with those key stakeholders and start developing and putting down your ideas on the direction you think you want your program to go. And like I said, be fluid and be agile and ready to change some of that, because when the data starts coming in and some of the things you're looking at, it's going to change your idea on what you think your policy should have been. The other thing is, as you're developing these plans, really focus on what your goals are and the behavioral changes you want to make with your drivers. And use a lot of words like safety culture and behavioral changes, and try not to criminalize your employees. We really didn't focus on what they did wrong as much as tried to help them get to where we wanted them to be, a safer driver. And that's the way our policy is written. The other thing is, again, it's all about safety. We push safety, safety, safety. We stayed away from, watchdog words and Big Brother and all these different things that, people think, oh, you're just watching me drive around. And then we explain to them, when we're looking at policy and telematics, we have so many drivers, we can't focus on just one driver. So we put a plan together to manage by exception, and then with that, then we followed our plan, and we were consistent with that. We did our best to stay diligent and focus on high-risk drivers. Through that, we were able then to use our policy to push that behavioral change with different types of online training, just in-person training. There was a lot of different things that we used to, once we identified those high-risk drivers, to start changing those behaviors. And then the other thing was, with that, we treated everybody the same. And with those high-risk drivers, when we started changing their behaviors, we got away from anything, we wanted to really avoid negligent entrustment. That was a big change for us. And then the other thing was, is once we kind of got our policy up to date and we were moving it around and doing the things we want, you have to keep changing. I mean, we all know this year has been a really strange year. So cultures have changed, society has changed, the industry changed, technology has changed. With all those different things, we had to keep moving and updating our policy to go to that next change. So we'll talk a little bit about the key stakeholders and what we did there. It was important for us as we started to develop our plan, was that we went out and identified the people who, once we made our policy and once we made our telematics plans, who was going to be the most affected by those plans. So we went out and we grabbed some HR folks, we grabbed some safety folks, we grabbed some management. We're in construction, so we had construction operations involved in it. And we brought in everybody that we built this team around, and we started developing our plan, which then started developing our policy, because policy was what supported our plans. So with that, we sat in a big room together, and I just said earlier, one of the things we did is we had telematics in place long before we had a policy actually in place. So we were able to set a benchmark. We were able to look at drivers' data and set a benchmark so that we knew exactly where we were at as far as driving behaviors. Then we went in as a group and we started adjusting rules and doing different things like this to see where the data took us. And that was the important thing. We allowed the data to pretty much tell us what adjustments we needed to make and where our rules would be established. Everybody was interested in speeding, so we wanted to make a policy about speeding. But what kinds of speeding? Where were those affected at? What happens when somebody passes somebody? Is it just 1 mile an hour over the speed limit? And all these different things. So we actually took the data and we kept massaging it to get an idea of what we thought was a good safety rule for us. We have a couple different speeding rules. We have one that allows somebody to pass, so you can go above the speed limit for a certain amount of time and then get back down. And then we have an overall speeding limit. So once they go over that, there's no tolerance. They get a mark on their scorecard. And so those were one of the things. The other thing was seatbelts. What's the seatbelt rule? Is it immediate? You have to have a seatbelt on as soon as you put it in drive. Do you give somebody the opportunity to take off and go, oh, darn, I forgot my seatbelt, or maybe the light on the car tells them the seatbelt needs to be on. And so we looked at that data, and we had a lot of people that were violating what if you did the immediate seatbelt rule. So we massaged that one as well, and we figured there was a speed and a time. Again, we're construction, so we have a lot of folks that drive around a construction project at under 5 miles an hour, and they may only drive a few hundred feet, then they get out. So we didn't want to hold those people to the same rule. So we adjusted that rule as well. And then again, we had a time, a duration, and a speed limit that worked best for us. Again, having this team together and having different types of people from all over our business, we really struggled to overcome some of the differences. Safety wanted to be more strict, operations not as strict, HR wanted to treat everybody the same. So it was very important that we focused on what our end goal was, which was safety, right? We said we wanted to have this safety culture. We wanted to change driver behaviors. And we came up finally, we really focused on what those goals were. We stayed positive. We stayed away from being negative and fighting with each other. So that was really important. And in the end, we were able to come up with all these rules. And once we had those goals in place, we could really start to establish what our policy was going to be. And at that point too, everybody had key interest in that, right? Everybody had, they were our stakeholders. Everybody had that input. Everybody felt they had some ownership involved in it. And that was our support process when we were done. That's where this became the backbone. Because once we started to develop our policies, we had people that helped us establish our goals, help us establish our rules, and then they were there to support us when we needed them to support the policy. So then what did we do? We really had to prioritize and focus on our top goals. anybody who's looked at telematics and some of the things that they bring in, there's so much data that comes in from telematics. And so you had to really kind of narrow your focus at first. Having too broad of an approach was just too much data. It was, I call it data anxiety. You just had too much coming in. You couldn't take in all that data and make an effective changes. So when we started to implement our telematics and we started to evaluate the rules and look at our policy that we put into place, we realized real quick that if we didn't start managing by exception, we were going to be in real trouble. And that also helped us then, like we talked about earlier with the rules that we set up, is manage that exceptions, and then we could focus and pinpoint on areas where we need to make adjustments. And then we could also pinpoint our high-risk drivers and go to those drivers and come up with a plan to help them become a better driver. And with that, we made it a real point to make sure that our drivers understood that this was their data and that we would provide them any information they needed to help them improve. So we wanted to make sure that if they were having issues that we did this all the time. We had a phone call with the driver. We would bring up the report. We would say, hey, now here's where you're having your issues, and we want to get you on the right track. And so one of the ways we did it in our policy states that we judge our drivers at the end of each month for the previous month. And so what we do is a scorecard that goes out to our drivers weekly. And that allows our drivers to call us up, say, hey, I had a bad week last week. What's going on with my score? And through that transparency of providing them their own data and going through the areas, that allows them to make a change before the end of the month. And then they don't get in trouble at the end of the month. They have 3 weeks or whatever it is to make those corrections. And that made a real impact on our drivers. It showed them that we cared. It showed them that we weren't just out there to enforce policy and get people in trouble, that really it was about having a safe culture and about focusing on changing those driving behaviors. And you know, I've had multiple drivers come back to me and tell me they just didn't realize at first how bad of drivers they were and how much it affected their personal lives, and that their wives would actually tell them how slow they drove and how they drove like a grandpa from now on. But that safety culture went with them. And one of the things we definitely pushed and we explained to them, again, instead of just enforcing policy and trying to get people, fired or whatever it was, that we told them we wanted to get home safe at night. We wanted to see their children. We wanted to see their grandchildren, whatever that was. That was the important part of us. And the one thing we did is we took the time to get it right. We wanted to take the time before we really started enforcing our rules and our policies was to get it right. We did have a grace period from when we put our policy in place. We put these new rules in place. We did a 3-month grace period to let people understand how this was going to work. We sent out warning letters. We showed people the data that we were working with. We went over the policy with them. We made every single one of our drivers acknowledge our policy. There was a Q&A for our policy, so that way they could go through and look at what is telematics, what do the lights mean, what does it mean if I get a beep in the vehicle, all those different things to help support that policy and push that change. We talked about earlier too, is some of our goals change because of what happens with change in the industry, change in technology. And this year, COVID, we're having to change policy because now we've got to put something in about cleaning the vehicle and cleaning touch points and what kind of chemicals to use and all these different things that we have out there for policy change. And again, it's about safety. We're pushing that for safety. And then the other things to think about is when you're looking at this and you're focusing on your goals, a lot of the new vehicles that we're ordering come with new safety equipment. Is it lane changing? Is it cross path detection, emergency braking? There's all these different. We have to change our policy so that how do we want our drivers to work? How do we want that to affect them? Can they turn off those options? Because a lot of those you can just go in and shut them off. One of them was our idling. So a lot of our vehicles we're ordering have start-stop technology. So when you go up, sit at a stoplight, it turns off. Well, a lot of people get aggravated with that and they turn it off. Well, now that affects your fuel that you were expecting to save some money on your fuel mileage because you bought a vehicle with start-stop technologies. So those are other things to take into consideration when you're reevaluating your policies. We talked about too that no company is, equal. None of the rules are equal. Make sure, I definitely bounce things off other fleet managers all the time and ask them, what are you doing? How is this affecting what you guys do? And making those changes so that they work for our company. The other thing is communicate your success and show your results. So that's one of the things we do really well. It could be a single construction site where we've set them up so that they can see how they're doing, how their drivers are doing, how their scorecards look. And so we set up different reports that go out each week, each month to each one of those locations. Not all the results are good, but the great part is because we have stakeholders, we have people involved, we have management involved, they then go to the drivers. I see the emails all the time. They tell them good job, bad job, hey, what can we do to improve this? They share those results with all the drivers. So then there's a little bit of gamification included in there. There are also some of our projects put annual reviews. They put a score in there for the annual reviews that the drivers have to meet. And so it's really holding everybody accountable based off of the telematics, off the scorecard, off the policy. And then we also are using that information to look at our roadmap for the future. So it can be difficult. It can be really hard. We've made a lot of change, and I'll be excited here in a second to show you guys our success. And we've made a huge difference in how our drivers' behaviors have changed and having accidents or collisions and where we're going with that. So it's always like, what's the next step? Once you get to a certain point, what can I do? And so some of the things, we've talked about and looked at are, can you go to continuous monitoring and VRs? Can you look at online training? Can you have different types of evaluations for people, like risk evaluations and types like that? Once you get those risk evaluations, do you go to, like I said, online training to try to push and change your program? So with that, again, our policies are going to continue to evolve. And we look at old policies that we had in, our older policies that we had in place. There's so many things that have changed. Again, now a lot of places marijuana is legal. So how do you put that into your policy? Where do you, how do you judge a person based on what are the legal ramifications? How can you do that? So we had to go in and look at a lot of different things with our safety folks and HR folks to see how we would evaluate that type of drug use. The other thing is conceal and carry handguns. How did we handle that? Do we allow people to have those in the vehicles? Do we not allow them to have it? So we had to do research about that. Ubers and all these different rideshare programs that are out there, how do we put those in our policies? We had to make sure that everybody understood that you can't use your vehicle to do, go out at work at night and make you a little extra cash. So those were different things that we put in place. And those were things you didn't even think about 5 years ago in a lot of places. They were just standard policy. So we had to make those changes and put those in there. We wanted to make sure, too, when we make those changes, that we reach back out to all of our employees and make sure they understand and acknowledge those changes so that you can hold drivers accountable. And we make sure they understand that they're going to be held accountable for any kind of policies that we have. And this is where I'm pretty excited to talk about the changes that we made. So we started our telematics in 2012, and we really used it for location services pretty much only. And it was just to know where our assets were. And we started to really know in about 2013 that our accident rate was getting pretty high, or a collision rate. And so we figured out there was really something by 2014 that we had a trending up and we needed to do something about it. So in 2015, that is when we started looking at our telematics. It's when we started adjusting policies. It's when we started creating rules, and we created a scorecard. And with that, you can see here on our graph that in 2015, once we started using those systems and having people acknowledge, we went from 9.52 accidents per million miles to 6.1 accidents per million miles in our first year of having telematics. And again, not only telematics, we had the buy-in from our key stakeholders. We had our accident review board that we have every month that we also got involved and really looked at all of our driver scores and looked at the risk evaluation. This is when our scorecards started going out on a weekly and monthly basis. And we actually, like I said, we gave a 3-month period where we didn't hold anybody really accountable other than just warn them, we gave them this grace period. So 2016 was our first real year of having telematics and our new policy from the first of the year to the end of the year. And again, we saw a little drop there in our accidents per million miles. When we started this whole program, so our scorecard is 0 is the worst, 5 is the best. We were at a 3.3 as a company average. Now I can proudly say to this day, we average 4.5, 4.6 as a company. So anyway, we move on 2017. We had a little uptick, a little more miles, and 2018 we kind of came up again a little bit. So then last year was like, well, so what else can we do? We're kind of seeing this trend again. And this is where we talked about adjusting and kind of having a fluid program. We changed a little bit. We did put in continuous monitoring MVRs. We did start evaluating accidents, including in a risk evaluation with the MVR, the driver score, and any kind of accident evaluation. That's where our ARB got involved, our Accident Review Board, and started doing more evaluations. And we started driving more online training. So what happens in 2019 when we start that? We start seeing a downward trend again. And then 2020, it's been a strange year. Our mileage is going to be down a little bit, but our accidents per million miles is still trending to be lower than it was the year before. And probably what I'm most proud of is the fact that I had one of our construction management guys come to me and tell me this is probably one of the single greatest safety programs that Black & Veatch had put in place. It had made that big of a difference with his employees, with the guys that he works with, and to see the amount of accidents that was reduced. And we've cut it by darn near 50% over that time frame. So we are pretty proud of that, and I am excited to share those with you. Again, we came up with a policy. We came up with goals. We used those to drive our telematics program. With that, we showed our results. We drove driver behavioral change and not driver correction, right? And I'm proud to say to this day, we started this program in 2015. We've done it for 5 years. We have not terminated one employee for violating policy. Every driver that has come there, has had an issue, has corrected those and changed their behavior and didn't need to be terminated. And again, you look at our scores, you can see that even with those same drivers, they've made that change. And so then again, this is what drives our roadmap for the future. This is what keeps pushing me to keep continuing to drive down our total accidents per million miles. So what's next? Do we go to cameras? Do we go to facial recognition where it can, look at distracted driving? We did change distracted driving policy this year. Our new policy will be no cell phone use whatsoever, where we were hands-free before. Those are some of the things we continue to look at to say, is it cost effective? Can we continue to drive change and change behaviors? And then just getting rid of some of that old school policy as well. We want to make sure we're on the top. If we have to come to a situation where we have litigation and we have to go to court over something that happens, we want to make sure that our policy is top notch and that everybody's following that policy, and they can't use that against us to say that we were negligent. Listen, collisions happen, accidents happen. You're not going to get away from that. But what we can do is limit our liability, try to keep our drivers safe, use the new technologies that are out there with vehicles to continue to drop that. One other thing I want to say before I'm done here, I only have a couple minutes left, and then we'll start taking questions, is if you look at our non-preventable scores, you can see that our non-preventables every year decrease dramatically, probably more than in our preventable. And through our accident review board, we kind of reviewed that and what we thought why our non-preventables dropped more than preventables, because they're non-preventable. How can you change that? When we looked at it, we dropped our speeding by 10 or 15 miles an hour, and we dropped how our drivers were driving, where they, harsh cornering, harsh braking, harsh acceleration. When you improve all of that, we looked at it, and it just gave our drivers more time to avoid those accidents that was going to be somebody else's fault. And so that was not something we foresaw at all. We did not think that by changing what we did with our policy and putting all our plans in place, we did not think that we'd see this major drop in preventable, because they're non-preventable, but we did. And that's one thing. It's just to put that in your mind and think about that when your drivers are driving slower, more cautious, and being more defensive, they can actually avoid the accidents that normally they wouldn't be able to, and it wouldn't even the ones that aren't their fault. So I hope this helps everybody. I hope you guys have some good questions. I think the data kind of speaks for itself in the success of our program, and how having a really good policy, getting your key stakeholders involved, getting that support from management, and truly driving safety changes and safety behavioral changes will make your telematics policy work for you and help you achieve your goals.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. The first question that we have for you right out of the gate is, how often do you have drivers renew their driver agreements?
We do it annually, every year. And I should say this, we're moving towards this. We will push to have them now. It will actually be like a training course. We'll have to go through, they're going to have to do it. We're in the process of doing that now. And they'll go in every year, do a refresher, and then sign off and acknowledge it.
Perfect. Next question that we have for you is, can you let us know what your fleet size is?
So we currently operate about, as far as telematics-wise too, we're operating just over 500.
Alrighty, next question that we have for you. Is there a formal schedule for the stakeholders to meet?
We did, actually. When we were first getting together, it was kind of interesting. We had a weekly meeting, because what would happen is, a lot of times, understand too, that we already had our data out there, so we kind of had our benchmark. We would actually make a change with our telematics rules, and we'd let that run for a week, and then we would sit in front of a big projector screen, and we would see what those effects were on driving habits and all of that, and how many people were in violation. And so with that helped us drive what our goals were, and then how we were going to make our policy. So we did that every week, and it took us, no kidding, like 3 months. But I told you, we took our time, and we wanted to get it right, and we wanted to adjust those rules to where it could work for everybody. So it was once a week for about 3 months.
Alrighty, next question we have for you, Jeff. Do you have any additional safety monitoring hardware, like cameras, forward-facing and driver-facing, above the base Go device?
We have not yet. We've looked at it. There's a lot of great technology out there right now that's coming out, and we've talked with a lot of different folks, and there's the possibility that we could. So is that the next evolution, right? We've dropped all these accidents down, collisions have come down, and that we've definitely looked at how much further can we take this. Our goal would be 0. I don't think any of us believes that can ever happen, but you can sure try. So I think we will be doing some of that in the future.
Alrighty, next question we have is, when you say continuous MVR monitoring, are you notified of any changes to a driver's MVR in real time?
We are. So as soon as it's reported from that state's DMV, or whoever's doing the driver's license, as soon as that comes in, we get a notification. And there's a grading on it, right? So is it high risk? Do we need to look at it? Like, say a DWI comes across, we get this notification that says, hey, you got a driver that just came across with a DWI. If it's something smaller and it's just, a speeding ticket and it was 5 miles and over the speed limit, we don't necessarily get like a quick notification on that. It does affect their score, and we see the change in their risk score. We don't get like a notification. When we get those on the ones that where maybe their driver has been revoked.
Awesome. All right, next question we have is, you mentioned gamification earlier. Did you have any formal gamification programs in place, and can you provide any examples?
We did not put anything in place like giving awards or anything like that. We did have some of our projects that we have out there construction-wise that did a few things, and I'll be honest with you, I wasn't involved in those. Most of the gamification I'm talking about it's just bragging rights. A lot of our projects and a lot of our locations, our offices actually have a screen up, and it shows the driver scores on those screens. And it also, at any one time, they can see where the vehicles are that are associated with that project. So it's more of a, hey, I'm on top this week and you're not. So, and I was actually surprised on how much just being competitive and having people want to be better than the other people improved it. But we never did a reward system for driving. And I'll be honest with you, when we talked about it and we sat there with our stakeholders and we talked about, should we put a program together, a lot of them were like, maybe this is the wrong way to look at it, but they were like, it's their job. Just for them to be gainfully employed is their reason for having to do this. They didn't think that they should be rewarded for doing what was right and what they should have been doing in the first place. I don't mean that worked for everybody, but that's kind of how we looked at it.
Alrighty, next question that we have for you here, Jeff. Did you start seeing any changes in driving behavior before you even started your official change management? There has been a lot of feedback from other organizations that drivers start adjusting behaviors just because they know that they're being tracked.
It's a great question. So the thing with us is we started putting our telematics devices in 2012, and we didn't start making our changes till 2015. So most of our drivers had never even heard from anybody other than we said, we would get the occasional dead battery warning, and we'd call us, hey, do you need assistance kind of thing. But we never even tried to change driver behavior. So they went 3 years, 2.5, 3 years of just driving normally. So we were really fortunate for the fact that we had a really good benchmark. People were, trust me, if you saw our data, you would know people didn't care the devices were in the vehicles. And that's where we realized, we couldn't keep our head in the sand anymore. And we had to come up with a new policy, and we had to drive change and start holding our drivers accountable.
All right, next question we've got for you here, Jeff, is did you have any privacy considerations related to displaying driver names versus just using the data reporting on the vehicles?
We did not. And we've been doing this for 5 years now. And I can't tell you that I've ever had an instance where somebody is worried about it being a privacy issue. We don't just share details of the driving. We have scores, right? There's a scorecard. But as far as actual driver details, that goes to supervisors and the actual driver only, and HR if they have to get involved. Let's say there's some sort of corrective action that's put into place for them to get better. So the actual details of that are held pretty confidential. But the scores themselves are not. And then when they're looking at their risk evaluation as well, they can see how they stack up with others, but it doesn't tell them who is a lower or high risk or low risk. So I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. It looks like that is the last question for today's session, so everybody knows what that means. It's a wrap for this week's Wildcard Wednesday. Again, a big thank you to Jeff for joining us today, sharing this presentation, and answering everyone's questions. If you guys do have any further questions regarding today's topic, don't hesitate to reach out to your reseller or your account manager and get those answered. But with that being said, until next time, I'm Shay Green, and I want to thank everyone for joining us on today's Wildcard Wednesday. We'll see you guys next time, same Geotab time, same Geotab channel. Thanks so much, everybody.